I think the trick is always to find a way to create empathy with that person that you're communicating with at whatever level that is.
If you want to make that leap into the upper levels of leadership, you need to think about anything else that you would advise people coming up to learn.
Well, let's see. I think systems thinking. Networking is not some phony thing that you do. It's actually a completely genuine thing you do. And it's about finding your tribe, having a group of people you trust who help each other out in their career journey. And also, by the way, you might make some new friends.
Words of encouragement or warnings or something like that would you give someone just entering the industry now?
The people who are the most successful, I find, that I see, are people who genuinely have a passion for what they're doing.
All right. So my guest today is Karl Mosgofian. He's had a long and illustrious career in IT, most recently as a CIO at Gainsight. Met Karl a while back and was really, really interested in sort of the way that he thought about sort of structurally what a CIO is, what a CIO does, and how does IT fit into the rest of the business. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with him today. So to start with, just to get things kicked off, Karl, you've had a great career. Tell us a little bit about the steps you took and like how did you end up making that leap into CIO? I'm really interested in sort of the path that you took to get there.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun to be here, and it's been an interesting path, which I think is not uncommon. I've been doing this a long time, and like a lot of folks, I didn't necessarily start off thinking I was going to be an IT guy. And sort of fell into it. But I started pretty young and really just had a passion for making things with computers. I started early enough that I got to do a little bit of everything. So things weren't quite as siloed as they are now, which I think served me well when I became a CIO, to have touched a little of everything. Back in the old days, I was my own systems administrator and DBA and programmer and project manager all in one, right? So it's been a great ride, and I've seen a lot of technology revolutions come along the way. So I'm looking forward to talking about it more today. I was a CIO for quite a while, and also just an IT executive at different levels. And so I've got a lot of experience at sort of different levels of management. All along the way.
So I'm curious, like one of the things I'm super interested in is, and I've seen this in my own career, where you make these sort of leaps and there's this sort of like step function in the job description where you go from being an individual contributor to a manager to a leader, and I'll make that distinction, and then a leader to like a C-level executive. And those things, like it's often hard sometimes on one side or the other of that chasm to really understand. So I'm super curious, like, when you became, for instance, your CIO, your first CIO job, what was surprising to you, or what are the things that you think about, like that you learned there, or at subsequent ones that you think people who are looking to make that leap but haven't made it yet might not really be thinking about?
It took me a long time to get there. So by the time I did, I'd had a lot of experience. I'd worked with a lot of different executives, including some exposure to CEOs and CFOs. But I think when you become a CIO, one of the biggest things is just you're now dealing with the board. Sometimes you're dealing with the executive team more. And so the perspectives are a little different. What they need from you is a little different than maybe what you've been used to. Your communication style changes. But in some ways, it's not different in the sense that at each stage in your journey, I think the trick is always to find a way to create empathy with that person that you're communicating with at whatever level that is. If you can't see things through their perspective, then you can't communicate with them very effectively. As a practical matter, what I always coached my teams was, if you can't imagine the deck that you're writing, what it's going to feel like to the person who's reading it, if you can't see it through their eyes, then you're probably not going to write a very good deck. And if you want to do a better job of communicating, that's the number one thing you need to do.
That is a very, what I think I would describe as a very singular lesson. It's one of those things where, like, I'm imagining you went through a couple situations where you like learned, oh, actually empathy is kind of a key thing here. Do you have a particular like thing, like when you learned that, what was the situation, or how did you end up, how did the empathy light bulb go off? Or have you always been a tremendously empathetic person? I'm super curious about this.
I think part of it was natural, but I think part of it was you learned the hard way. I also had some great mentors along the way. I used to work for a guy who I would hand him my draft presentation, and he would go through it essentially with the red pen and be absolutely brutal. And I hated every minute of that. And I thank him every day for it because I learned a lot. And he taught me a lot. And what he would say is, I understand this all makes sense to you, but you need to understand what it means to the person who's receiving it. And that was a hard lesson. By the way, it's a lesson that I feel like I had to continue to learn because it really was not that long ago in my long career that I actually had the epiphany that I needed to apply that at the level of the CEO.
Okay.
Because I think you can have a lot of empathy and all of that, and then but still be thinking to yourself, but why doesn't that person appreciate what I do? Why aren't they giving me more attention or more support? And what I found, what I realized, and to be honest, I realized it in trying to explain it to other people. Sometimes when you have to explain something to other people, you have to figure it out yourself. And what I found myself saying is, look, you've got a decision point. You maybe have an investment you think we should make. We have a problem. I think I should go buy this thing to solve that problem. And from your point of view, it makes a ton of sense. And it's a real problem and a real solution. And the problem is, by the time that bubbles up, let's say from a director level person to a CIO, the CIO has 10 really good things that people in their team want to go do, and they can afford 2 of them. And by the time your 2 go up to the CEO, they've got 30 things across the whole company, and they can do 6. So it's not a question of, is this a good thing to do? Is it a problem? Is this a solution? Yeah, but it takes more than that. And that's something that I think is really important to understand, among other things, so that you don't make yourself crazy thinking, tearing your hair out, right? You've got to have some patience, and you have to have some understanding and appreciation for that. But again, I think it also helps you in communicating and maybe winning that argument internally around an investment or a decision that needs to be made, because now you start to understand that for the person you're talking to, it's not a technical decision, it's an investment decision. And that's a different lens. They're looking at things differently than you are. And if you can't speak their language and explain to them why this is a good investment for the company, then you're probably never going to win that argument.
It's a super interesting point because, like, along the way, you've sort of mentioned, okay, this idea of empathy for the other stakeholders in the business and the people that you're talking to, and this sort of communication skills at multiple different levels. So that all kind of resonates. And now, what we're talking about here is this idea that, like, we're going to switch the lens and talk more about the thing we want to do, less from the technical perspective, but more from an investment perspective. So, how did you end up picking up enough about sort of either business terminology or like actual like finance? How did you end up becoming fluent in the language of finance when in your career, and did it help a tremendous amount?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because a lot of CIOs have gone out and gotten an MBA to try and boost that part of themselves. But I think what you would find is, with or without the MBA, which I did not do, you would find a lot of business acumen in most CIOs, because we're so tied to every aspect of the business. And in fact, I think more than probably anybody other than maybe some people in finance, we really have this 360-degree view. We understand the whole quote to cash process and all 12 teams that it touches, and systems and processes and pieces, in a way that probably no one else in the company really does. It's part of the value that we bring. We're seeing all of that. And so we tend to learn a ton about business. And really, at a certain point, to be honest, you're more of a business person than you are a technology person, so to speak. One thing that did happen with me is that I discovered early on that my curiosity and my sort of being a nerd applied to business as much as technology. In other words, I was really curious. I think curiosity is a super important trait. And if you don't have it, it's hard to go very far. And if you have it, it's amazing how far you can go without necessarily, for instance, you don't need an MBA to know business if you're really curious about it genuinely, because you'll go soak it up because there's tons of stuff available to you, right? And I discovered pretty early on, I actually started a small company and was doing custom business systems development for people. So someone would come to me and say, I have a law firm and I want a legal time and billing package. And I would say, sure, I can write that. And then I would go figure out how to write it. And because this was the old days and it was kind of the Wild West. But what I found was I was fascinated to learn how a law firm operates and all the details of their time and billing. Now, that's a particular kind of nerdery, right? But it turned out to be very useful from a career standpoint. But I would say that, if people feel like they need more of that business knowledge, part of the trick to that is just apply some of your own curiosity to that space and let yourself be a business nerd as much as a technology nerd.
That makes tons of sense. And as you did that, and as you sort of like ascended into the CIO role, like, are there a particular set of skills that ended up being like, these are ones I'm super like I would, don't leave home without them. If you're on your way up, you need to pick up these 3 or 4 things that were non-obvious to you when you started. I mean, we mentioned sort of this idea of like empathy is more of a trait. It's kind of, actually, I've learned it's hard to teach empathy, and it's just really difficult. Like, that's what raising children is like. And then this idea of curiosity, which is a little bit more inbuilt. We've talked about sort of finance skills. Are there other skills that you're like, if you want to make that leap into the upper levels of leadership, you need to think about? Anything else that you would advise people coming up to learn?
Well, let's see. I think systems thinking.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I think, especially in technology, when I first started, I was a programmer. And so I write a program to do a thing. And even in that process, I started to figure out pretty quickly that you can't be too siloed. You've got to understand how all the pieces fit together. And those layers of abstraction just keep getting bigger and bigger. And that includes process, right? So again, there's almost no business process in a company that lives in a silo anymore. Mm-hmm. It almost all connects to something else. And so the more you can start to really see the system as opposed to just the pieces, that's what enables you to really solve problems, frankly, and really add value. Put on, as they used to say, your corporate hat, right? To really see things from a higher perspective in terms of what they mean to the organization as a whole. I think that's really key. I think the other thing is communication. And there's so many people who come up through the technology ranks who are super smart. They have so much going for them, but maybe they're a little introverted, or they're just not as comfortable getting up in front of a room of people or having conversations and things. And I think that's something that you actually can work on. I think there are some things that you just need reps. You just need to practice. And there are ways that you can do that. And so I encourage people who are earlier in their career but who have high aspirations, if they don't feel comfortable, to go take a class on public speaking and get into situations where you can do public speaking, get opportunities to play leadership roles, even if it's not in your particular company, right? People talk about wanting to sit on a board someday. I say, well, how about getting on a nonprofit board?
Yeah.
Not exactly the same, but
you'll get exposure.
Yeah. Experience. It'll make you more comfortable for that time when maybe that other bigger opportunity comes up later.
Fascinating. Well, and there, I think, I've had this experience myself of sort of like starting in the very technical and sort of having to build a lot of those people skills. One of the things that, I've also ended up, knowing about you is that you have a tremendous network of folks and like lots of connections and things like this. Did you start out really affable and people oriented, or did you had to build that muscle?
I absolutely had to build that muscle. Which is not to say that I was a total introvert and like that, but I did have to build that muscle. Again, a former boss and mentor did something once where he had everyone in his organization find someone they didn't know and go have lunch with them as a way to sort of force us out of our shells, right? And also force a cross-functional communication, which was super helpful. The person I went to lunch with years later, it was great. I was so happy that I had gotten to know him and his area better and stuff. So yeah, but again, I would say it's reps. You got to just go do it. And if you're uncomfortable with it, then do it more, right? And but I also really learned the value of networking once I became a CIO.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you're CIO, it comes kind of naturally. So the network is sort of created for you. Vendors hold events, you show up at them. There's other CIOs. But once I discovered how great it was to have that group of people that support each other, help each other out. Hey, have you ever seen this before? What do you think? What I realized is I couldn't do the job without them. My network is everything to me. And it's one of the number one things that I recommend to people earlier in their careers is networking is not some phony thing that you do. It's actually a completely genuine thing you do. And it's about finding your tribe and connecting with them and having a group of people who you trust who help each other out in their career journey. And also, by the way, you might make some new friends, some genuine good friends along the way. So I'm always telling people, a vendor may not make it easy for you at your level, right? You may not get invited. Like I get invited to dinners every week. You may not get invited to dinners every week, but you can go on meetup.com and say, I'm going to be in this place at this time. Who else wants to get together and discuss this thing? And you'd be amazed at how, first of all, there may already be something out there, but if there's not, go create it.
Super good advice. I want to pivot a little bit and talk. So you've had kind of a ringside seat over time to sort of transitions in the IT space and all of these new technologies that have come up. I mean, most people, today don't realize, but the internet was invented at a point in time, and we end up seeing, what that happened. And I think back to my parents went to work in offices where they wrote memos on typewriters and moved them around through interoffice mail and reusable envelopes and things like this. So a tremendous amount of stuff has shifted. I am curious, as you think about it, what are the big ticket ways that's changed the way IT functions? Is the way that IT functions in a business different significantly now than it was, say, 20 years ago?
I think it is. I think the biggest thing is that when SaaS came along, it really took a lot of the power away from IT and distributed it throughout the company. And we're seeing that now even more so with AI. And so I think what's happened is IT is less the centralized dictator who controls everything and more of a facilitator for the company. Because at the end of the day, even though a particular business group may be able to sort of swipe their credit card, so to speak, and fire something up or just go use some AI tool, having coordinated business processes that work across the company is really hard. And it's hard for anyone in any one of those groups to do that by themselves. So I think nowadays you see IT very much owning integration, data, governance, some things like that, but not necessarily running every single application in a company. And I think that's okay. I think you've got to be able to have a sort of hybrid environment that works for everybody. That my thing was always, I just want it to work. I don't necessarily care who owns it. But it doesn't always work. And so you've got to pay attention to some of those organizational structures and make sure you have something that realistically can work.
And do you think as we go, obviously compliance and governance around IT systems has gotten more and more sophisticated as time has gone on, security becoming more of a function, that sort of thing, pivoting to what the talk of the town is, right? So AI and AI tools are sort of, I think we could agree, sort of another big revolution. Your crystal ball, I totally get it. It's probably as foggy as everybody else's, but I'm super curious. Like, how do you think that AI in the current world shifts again, sort of the role of IT, and then how information technology is just used in the business generally? What do you see?
I think it's going to be huge, but in some ways, it's going to follow a similar trajectory to all these other technologies. First of all, it's a tool.
Okay.
So it's not magic pixie dust. There are areas where it's going to be helpful and super helpful and transformational, and other areas where it's not actually going to impact you that much. So you've got to use the right tool for the job, and that's always the case. And it's all got to be about how it's actually helping the business move forward. That's something that IT has always been really good at, is understanding not just here's a technology, but here's your business problem. Here's the right technology to help you solve that. Let us help you build a solution, right? Usually in partnership with the business. And so in that sense, I don't think it's any different. It's just more so. Because every technology revolution has democratized technology. It's empowered the business groups, and even now, I think with AI, individuals to solve problems with technology, which is awesome. But in some ways, the more diversified that capability is, the more you need someone keeping an eye on the big picture, whether that's governance or enterprise architecture or security or corporate data models, right? So that you don't have everybody doing their own thing, but they can't actually talk to each other because they're speaking a different language, right? Because they're seeing data in different ways. They're all calling it something different. Those kind of things are super important, and they make or break the value of enterprise technology.
As you're looking at a leader thinking about AI and implementing AI, obviously there's some experiments going on across their business, but from your perspective, thinking about on sort of like a cross company data model or some sort of like, I'm imagining MCP in the middle of this spider webbing out to a bunch of different things. That's where you sort of, if you were IT, is that sort of where you see IT playing, is in that sort of centralization hub?
Absolutely. The trick to integration, the trick to data often is the semantics, right? What are we actually calling this stuff? And do we mean the same thing? Because otherwise the data doesn't have any meaning, right? If you go to a system like Salesforce, typically you'll find 20 fields with the word amount in them, right? And so the question is, okay, what do all those actually mean in real life? And if you don't know, then chaos ensues. And most of the big problems that people have come down to exactly those kind of things. And again, it's hard for anyone in a particular business group with a particular focus to really understand that. And so I think you're always going to need people who can help you understand that big picture and tie everything together.
I'm curious, so what you're saying resonates tremendously. I've worked at big companies, I've worked at small companies, I've worked at small companies that became big companies, and they always struggled with this sort of enterprise information architecture, like it was just the forever problem. I'm curious, when you think about successfully deploying and maintaining an information architecture or semantic layer, if you will, like, one, have you seen it done well? And two, if you have, like, are there 2 or 3 things you take out to be like, hey, IT folks, these are tips and tricks you should really do, or these are things you should really do to make it so that your semantic layer is a little bit more smooth across the org?
I wish I had a silver bullet on this. I don't know any other way than to roll your sleeves up, to be honest. And maybe AI will give us some tools that will be able to sort of sift through a lot of content and derive some of that semantic meaning. However, I don't know, because I think it could just as easily come up with a lot of wrong answers. Because the problem is that the data you're sifting through is structured in one form or another. In other words, it's data, right? And even if you said, well, I'm going to take every meeting we've ever had, record them all, which we don't right now, but maybe someday we will, and feed that all into an LLM, it would still have to make judgments about what people were saying. So when you go out to an organization and you say, well, what do you mean by revenue? And then you go to another group and you say, those are complicated conversations, and synthesizing that stuff together, maybe an AI can do that someday, but I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I think we're a long ways from that.
Fair enough. If you were starting now, like if you were a leader or someone within the IT team who was starting now to understand the semantic layer at a new company, is there a particular place you'd start? You've mentioned sort of quote to cash as a process before. Oftentimes it's like, go find out how a bill becomes a law when you sell something. Like, where would you focus your energies to really kind of trace through and then begin understanding that?
I think I would start on the analytics side, just because I think it's easier. Right? If you go too low level, then you get lost in the weeds. Right? So, for instance, if you go to your NetSuite or your Salesforce or whatever platform you're using, and you look at all the fields, you'll get lost pretty soon. And also, you don't actually know which of those matter and which don't. I mean, really, most people's opportunity screen is really long and has a lot of fields. And usually there's stuff there that people are like, yeah, that's been there a long time. We're really not sure what the heck that means. So if you go to people and you say, what are the reports that you actually run your business based on? Then at least they've already figured out some of the key data elements that really matter to the business. And those are the things to start by making sure you've got a map, right, of how the analytics in marketing and sales and accounting in those different places, how those things connect to each other. And frankly, a lot of the other enterprise data may actually just be noise. So part of the trick is to not get lost in the noise.
So one other question along this line, and this is sort of turning our attention to sort of like new folks. I was actually at a university earlier this week, kind of giving a talk to fresh faced people. I'll tell you, they keep making college students younger and younger every day. My curiosity is, what words of encouragement or warnings or something like that would you give someone just entering the industry now? You know, it's an interesting time. AI's out, this sort of stuff. They're like setting off on what they hope to be an amazing career in IT. But like, what words of warning or advice would you give a new entrant?
Well, the first thing is, I think you need to have some passion about what you're doing. And so if you don't, find something else. And if you do, stick with it, even if you're reading articles that say that particular thing is not the best thing to do. At least that's what I think. Now, your mileage may vary, but the people who are the most successful, I find, that I see, are people who genuinely have a passion for what they're doing, and they've found a way to then turn that into a career, rather than sort of going backwards and saying, well, I want to achieve this thing, so therefore I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I think a genuine passion for what you're doing comes through in everything you do and everyone you work with. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is that I think in the modern world, there's much less of a career sort of hierarchy. And one way that I've seen it said is it's not a career ladder, it's a career jungle gym. Right? So you're not necessarily just moving up the next rung in a particular siloed space. I think people need to be really open to doing different things and building a little bit more of that 360-degree view. So if you're a programmer, but you never really work with your customers, the people who are the users, try and find a way to get that opportunity, right? So you can expand your understanding beyond your piece, right? If you're just a person who takes specs and writes code, think about becoming the person who writes the specs and trying that. Mm-hmm. And maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But even if it doesn't work and you go back to writing code, the experience of having tried that will make you a better coder. And vice versa, by the way. If you're someone who says, I'm a business analyst, I'm not a techie, I don't write code, try it. Try to write some code. Get out of your comfort zone, expand yourself. I think in the end, again, the people who are the most successful are not super siloed. They have a ton of different skill sets that they bring to the table. And it's the combination of those things that makes them so good, not that they're so good in one very small particular area.
Super interesting. I have to say, like, that resonates so much for me because so much of my career, I ended up being sort of the person they sent to like and you're going to the customer site because you're junior enough that we can make you do it, or whatever, that kind of thing. And I got a tremendous amount of exposure across the board to different things, and that just allowed me to kind of get a deep appreciation. Like, sales is a hard job, like writing specs is difficult. Like, everybody's job was interesting and intricate in a way that kind of continued to sort of refine my understanding, and so I really enjoyed that as a thing. All right, so last question I want to ask you is, so if you are thinking about one resource, a book, a blog, a podcast, something that somebody like that you get a lot out of, that you're like, hey, and by the way, you should check this out, what would it be?
I will tell you that my current favorite podcast is the Not Another CEO podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've been telling people about it because we were talking about how if you have aspirations to move up into bigger levels of leadership, at some point, like, it's good to get information about how it is to do that job or how to do your job. But really, what you need to do is learn what the CEO job is like. You need to be able to see the world through that lens. And so I'm encouraging people to check that out. There's two reasons. One is that it gives you a little bit more of that CEO lens. The other thing is leadership is leadership. A lot of the leadership lessons that you learn from CEOs are completely applicable to anything you're doing at any level. So that's one that I'm really enjoying right now. I'm getting a lot out of both the podcast and the sort of weekly newsletter that he sends out. So highly recommended.
Very cool. Well, Karl, thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. I really appreciate the time and the candor and the sort of the experience you've loaned us. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks.